She gave him $20 at the hospital. Turns out, he's a billionaire heir. Before we step into this heartfelt story together, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know which corners of the world this journey is reaching. Wishing you a truly meaningful experience as you enjoy the story. Lena Brooks hadn't planned on being anyone's hero that morning. Honestly, she was too tired to even be her own. The fluorescent lights in County General buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale sheen over the cracked linoleum floor. It was 6:47 a.m. Her sneakers were soaked from the early spring drizzle, and her mom's clinic appointment was already running 20 minutes late. She rubbed her temples with the base of her palms, trying to shake off the dull ache of too little sleep and too much responsibility. The check-in line was long. Again. The kind of line that made people whisper curse words into coffee cups and check their watches every 3 seconds. Lena stood behind an elderly man wearing a too large Army vet jacket and a young woman rocking a crying toddler on her hip. Her mom sat hunched over in a plastic chair a few feet away, coughing quietly into her sleeve. Lena shot her a look. "Are you okay?" Her mom gave a weak thumbs up, then closed her eyes. Just a few more weeks, Lena thought. A few more clinical shifts, a few more tips from the coffee shop, and she'd finally graduate, become a full-time nurse, maybe even get a better apartment. One where the shower didn't whistle and the neighbors didn't scream at each other over burnt meatloaf at midnight. The line moved forward, slowly. Then came the voice. I think I left my wallet. No, it's got to be in my other pants. I'm sorry. This is really embarrassing." Lena turned her head slightly. At the front desk stood a man, mid to late 20s maybe, with dark brown hair falling into his eyes and a kind of boyish charm you'd see on cereal boxes or in Old Navy ads. But he wasn't charming right now. He looked panicked. His cheeks were flushed, and he kept patting every pocket like the wallet might suddenly teleport into existence. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she hadn't had a break since 1993, crossed her arms. "Sir, we can't release records without a processing fee. It was $20. That's policy." "I understand. I must have grabbed the wrong jeans or something. If I could just—" "Sir, we have a line." He looked over his shoulder, and that's when his eyes met Lena's. Just for a moment. She saw it, the flicker of humiliation, the kind that lodges deep in your chest when life reminds you that no matter how put together you pretend to be, one small thing, a missing wallet, can unravel everything. She knew that feeling, too well. "Here," she said, stepping forward, before she could think twice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled 10 and 2 5s, the tip money from her overnight shift. She extended it toward the receptionist without looking at the guy. "Processing fee. Paid." The receptionist blinked. The guy stared. "Ma'am, you don't have to," he started, but she cut him off with a tired smile. "It's fine. Just pay it forward." The receptionist accepted the cash with a shrug and turned back to her computer. The guy, still stunned, murmured a thank you that sounded like it had been exhaled rather than spoken. Lena returned to her spot in line, heart thumping slightly harder than it needed to. Why had she done that? She couldn't even afford a decent meal right now, but something about his face, it had looked like hers, like someone who was doing everything they could to hold it together. The man finished at the desk and turned to go. As he passed her, he paused. "Seriously, thank you. I'll find a way to pay you back." Lena nodded, trying not to smile. "No need." He hesitated a second longer, as if he wanted to say more. Then he walked out the sliding doors into the gray morning light. Lena didn't think she'd ever see him again. She was wrong. 2 days later, during her clinical rounds, Lena was wheeling a vitals cart through the hallway when someone called out, "Hey, excuse me, Nurse Brooks?" She turned and almost dropped her chart. It was him, the guy from the front desk. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand, and looking mildly sheepish. "You remembered my name?" she said, startled. "It was on the sign-in clipboard," he said. "I'm not a stalker, just observant." She raised an eyebrow. He stepped forward, holding out one of the cups. "Coffee from Bean Depot across the street. It's not great, but it's hot." She hesitated. She shouldn't accept gifts from patients. Then again, he wasn't a patient, and she wasn't on the clock yet, and it smelled really good. "Thanks," she said, taking the cup. He smiled. "I'm Jamie, by the way. Jamie Smith." He paused just long enough that it didn't sound natural, but she was too tired to care. "Smith, huh? That's not suspicious at all?" His grin widened. "Yeah, my parents were very uncreative." Lena laughed. It surprised her. Her first real laugh in what felt like a month. They stood there for a few beats, sipping lukewarm coffee under the hum of the hallway lights. "I still owe you $20, he said finally. "Forget it." "I can't. It's a matter of principle." "You're going to principle yourself into debt at this rate." He looked at her for a second, then said, quieter this time, "Still, thank you. People don't usually do that kind of thing. Not for strangers." She shrugged. "You looked like you needed it." "I did." And just like that, the moment shifted. Something small but solid passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Just a spark of recognition, like 2 people standing in the same storm and realizing they weren't alone. Lena checked her watch. "I should get back." "Of course, I'll see you around." "Maybe." She turned and pushed her cart away, the scent of that cheap coffee lingering longer than it should have. And Jamie, who wasn't really Jamie Smith at all, watched her go, thinking, for the first time in a very long while, that maybe stepping away from everything he'd ever known hadn't been a mistake. Not if it brought him here, not if it brought him to her. Lena didn't expect to see him again. Not really. Maybe she thought about it once or twice. How random and strange it had been to give $20 to a total stranger at a hospital front desk. But County General was a big hospital, and Jamie Smith was probably just a guy passing through on a bad day. That's what she told herself. So when she spotted him again, 3 days later, carrying an overstuffed clipboard in one arm and a small tray of vending machine snacks in the other, she actually did a double take. He was walking through the staff hallway as he belonged there. Gray sweatshirt, those same beat-up sneakers, and hair that hadn't seen a comb in at least a week. He didn't notice her at first, too focused on balancing a granola bar between his teeth while punching a code into the staff lounge door. She cleared her throat. He looked up, startled, and then grinned. "You again," Lena said, crossing her arms. Jamie took the granola bar out of his mouth. "Hey, fancy seeing you here." She gave him a skeptical look. "What are you doing in the staff hallway?" He nodded toward the door. "Helping with community outreach, volunteer stuff, mostly paperwork and, folding pamphlets. Very glamorous." "Since when do volunteers have access to staff lounges?" He hesitated a beat too long. "They gave me a badge." He pulled a visitor pass out of his sweatshirt pocket, waved it, and then stuffed it back quickly like a magician performing a cheap trick. "Convenient," Lena said. "You're suspicious," he said, mock-wounded. "I'm observant." He smiled. Touché. She tilted her head. "Seriously, though, why are you really here?" Jamie glanced around, then leaned in a little, lowering his voice. "Can I tell you something that makes me sound very uncool?" "That's a high bar, but go on." I kind of liked being here, that day, with you, even if it was awkward and weird and I didn't have my wallet or dignity. Lena blinked. So, he continued, I came back. Figured if I helped out, maybe I'd run into you again. She narrowed her eyes. That's borderline stalker behavior. I prefer the term dedicated admirer of coffee and coincidence. She tried not to laugh, but it slipped out anyway. Damn him. Jamie looked genuinely pleased with himself. There it is, that smile again. She rolled her eyes. You're ridiculous. Probably, but I brought snacks. He held out a mini bag of pretzels with exaggerated reverence. She took them with mock suspicion. Bribery won't work on me. Sure it won't. They walked side by side down the hallway toward the elevators. Lena glanced sideways at him. So, this volunteer thing, is it like a full-time gig now? He shrugged. Kinda. I help where I can. Makes me feel useful. Useful is good, she said, meaning it was more than she expected. They stopped at the end of the hallway. Jamie leaned against the wall, arms crossed. What about you? Still doing double duty between school and the cafe? She sighed. Yep. Nursing degree by day, latte slinger by night, living the dream. Sounds exhausting. Only on the days that end in Y. Jamie laughed. It was a warm sound, uncomplicated, genuine. Lena liked it more than she wanted to admit. So, she said, tapping the pretzel bag against her palm, you're just gonna keep showing up and pretending you're on official business. Maybe. And you're not gonna tell me what your deal is? He shrugged, but something in his expression shifted, just slightly. I will, eventually, when it's not so complicated. She raised an eyebrow. You're not married, are you? No. Secretly a mobster? He snorted. Definitely not. Okay, then I guess I'll allow the mystery, for now. He placed a hand over his heart. You honor me, Nurse Brooks. She shook her head. That's Miss Brooks to you. They parted ways after that. Lena returned to her rounds. Jamie disappeared somewhere down the admin corridor, likely pretending to be someone more important than he let on. But later, during her lunch break, she found a sticky note on her locker with a doodle of a coffee cup and a terrible joke written underneath it. It just said, "Why did the nurse carry a red pen?" in case she needed to draw blood. She groaned and laughed, then tucked the note into her pocket without really knowing why. Over the next 2 weeks, Jamie became a regular fixture at County General. He never got in the way. Somehow, he was always exactly where he was supposed to be, delivering patient files, helping visitors find their way, bringing fresh batteries to nurses whose pagers died mid-shift. He floated between departments like a particularly charming ghost who happened to know how to reset the printer when it jammed. Lena started seeing him everywhere. In the elevator, in the waiting room. At the vending machine, always stole the last bag of peanut M&Ms and offered half to her with a look that said he'd do it again tomorrow. He was careful, though, never too much. Never crossing lines. Always one step behind, until she gave him a reason to step closer. She didn't know what to make of it, and that bugged her. He was sweet, funny, a little weird, but he also knew things he probably shouldn't. Once, during a chaotic Code Blue response, he helped locate a defibrillator faster than anyone else. Another time, he corrected an intern about a hospital policy regarding uninsured patients, and he was right. She caught him glancing at an X-ray once and muttering, "Looks like an impaction, lower left quadrant," like he knew what he was looking at. Since when do pamphlet folders know radiology terms? She asked him after that one. He just smiled. You'd be amazed what you learn from medical dramas. Lena wasn't convinced. Something didn't add up. But she couldn't bring herself to push harder. Not yet. Besides, it was nice having him around. They developed a rhythm. She'd joke about being overworked and underpaid. He'd pretend to write a formal complaint letter on her behalf, complete with crayon drawings. She started saving him a seat during cafeteria lunches. He started bringing her extra packets of hot sauce from the burrito truck parked down the street. One afternoon, they ended up outside on the hospital roof, sharing a sandwich and talking about favorite books. Jamie confessed to never finishing anything longer than a newspaper article. Lena admitted she reread Little Women every time life felt overwhelming. She was too good for Laurie, she said firmly, mouth full of turkey sandwich. I have no idea who that is, Jamie replied, but I'll take your word for it. It became easy, familiar, too easy. This is probably why it caught her off guard when Jamie showed up late one evening, standing outside the ER entrance, holding 2 cups of something warm and wearing an expression that was quieter than usual. Hot chocolate, he said simply, handing her a cup. What's the occasion? He looked down at his shoes, then up again. Today sucked. Figured you could use something that doesn't. Lena took the cup and felt the heat against her fingers. You okay? Jamie hesitated. Yeah, just tired from pretending, I think. She frowned. Pretending? He shook his head. Never mind, ignore me. I'm being cryptic again. She didn't press. Instead, they sat on the curb in silence for a while, sipping hot chocolate and watching the blur of ambulance lights paint the pavement red and blue. When her pager buzzed, she stood to leave. He stood too. Hey, he said before she turned. Yeah? I really like talking to you. Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded, said softly, me too, and walked away. Later that night, she found another sticky note in her locker. This one read, If I told you the truth, would you still talk to me? And for the first time, Lena wasn't sure how to answer. The first time, Lena saw Jamie reset the cardiac monitor faster than the attending resident could figure out how to untangle the wires. She thought it was a fluke. The second time, when he casually reprogrammed an IV pump after a nurse asked someone to page tech support, she started paying closer attention. He always had a reason for being around. A clipboard to deliver, a wheelchair to push, a box of gloves to restock. But the more Lena watched, the clearer it became. Jamie knew way too much about hospital equipment for someone who supposedly just folded pamphlets. Do you moonlight as a biomedical engineer or something? She asked one day as he tightened a loose screw on an EKG cart using a Swiss Army knife he pulled from his sock. He glanced up at her like he hadn't realized she was watching. What? Number just good with my hands. She narrowed her eyes. That's not a real answer. It's a charming deflection, he replied, giving her his signature half-smile. She wasn't charmed, not this time. The thing was, Lena wasn't paranoid. She was pragmatic. After growing up with a chronically ill mom and more unpaid bills than birthday candles, she'd learned to read people fast, especially the ones who showed up with good intentions and left without warning. Jamie didn't seem dangerous. But there was something off, like he was always performing a little, like part of him was holding its breath. She tested him in small ways, asking about where he lived. He dodged, mentioning neighborhoods to see if he flinched. He didn't, but he also never confirmed or denied anything. She once asked what high school he went to, and he said, one with lockers and stairs. Very exclusive. Still, despite her better judgment, she didn't push hard. Not yet. Because the truth was, Jamie made her laugh when she wanted to cry. He brought ginger tea when her throat hurt. He stood next to her in crowded elevators, just close enough to make her pulse skip, but never too close to cross a line. He was, annoyingly, persistently, thoughtful. And maybe that's what made it worse. She didn't want to like him. Not really. Not when he refused to be fully real. One evening, after a particularly brutal shift involving a pediatric code blue and a family that had screamed at her for 15 minutes because of an insurance mix-up, Lena found Jamie sitting on the loading dock steps outside the ER. He looked like he'd been waiting. "You okay?" he asked quietly as she walked up, still in her scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. She sank down next to him and pulled her knees to her chest. "Long day." He didn't say anything, just offered her a protein bar from his pocket. It was half crushed, but she took it anyway. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the sunlight die against the parking lot asphalt. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" Jamie didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm on his knee. "Yes," he said eventually. "I do." "Then why keep doing it?" He let out a breath. "Because sometimes it's easier than explaining everything." She turned to face him. "Try me." He looked at her, really looked at her. And for a second, Lena thought he might finally drop the act. She saw something flicker behind his eyes, fear, maybe, or regret. But he just smiled sadly and said, "Not tonight." And Lena, tired, frustrated, hopeful Lena, let it go. Again. The next morning, she told herself she was done playing detective. She wasn't his girlfriend. She wasn't even sure what they were, friendly, flirty, somewhere between a maybe and a no. But then she opened her locker and found a coffee cup with her name scribbled on the side in Sharpie, along with a napkin that said, "Not tonight, but soon. Promise." She didn't know whether to roll her eyes or blush. She ended up doing both. The weirdest part wasn't that Jamie knew how she liked her coffee or that he kept slipping her sticky notes with terrible puns about nurses and thermometers. The weirdest part was how much she started to depend on seeing him. He became a quiet constant in the chaos. When her mom had a bad night, he was the one who noticed the puffiness around her eyes and offered a chocolate croissant without asking. When her favorite patient passed away, he showed up with a 6-pack of orange soda because she once mentioned her dad used to drink it whenever he needed cheering up. And when she got her clinical evaluation back with a glowing review, he clapped like she'd just won an Oscar. Jamie Smith, who wasn't really Jamie Smith, was becoming a fixture in her life. And she didn't know how to make peace with that. One Friday afternoon, Lena's coworker Jenny cornered her near the nurse's station. "Okay, spill," Jenny whispered. "That guy, the one with the dumb jokes and the hair, who is he?" Lena blinked. "What?" "The snack phantom. He brought me gummy bears on Tuesday. He's cute, he's funny, and I swear he winked at the heart surgeon last night. Is he your boyfriend or, like, a fairy god intern?" Lena choked on her coffee. "He's not my boyfriend," she said. "Yet," Jenny said with a smirk. Lena opened her mouth, closed it again, and fled to the supply closet under the pretense of needing gauze. Inside, she stared at the shelves and realized she was in trouble, because Jamie was slowly painting himself into her world, in little strokes, quiet gestures, and shared inside jokes. And Lena, who had spent most of her adult life learning how to protect her heart behind walls made of practicality and sarcasm, was starting to lower the drawbridge. That scared her. Not because he made her laugh or because he remembered how her mom liked her soup, but because she still didn't know who he really was. And falling for a mystery felt like signing up for heartbreak on purpose. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan whirring above her, Lena promised herself that if Jamie didn't start being honest with her soon, she'd have to walk away. Because trust couldn't survive on coffee and Post-its forever. The cafeteria at County General was nearly empty by the time Lena walked in, still in her scrubs, her badge half twisted on its lanyard. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering just enough to be annoying, and the food counter had already started shutting down. All that remained was a half-hearted salad bar and a lonely tray of meatloaf that looked older than the vending machine coffee. She didn't care. She wasn't hungry anyway. She spotted Jamie sitting alone at a back table near the vending machines, scrolling through something on his phone. A paperback novel sat open beside him, unread. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into that easy, almost reluctant smile she was starting to expect and dread. "You look like you just got hit by a freight train," he said gently. "I did," Lena replied, sinking into the chair across from him. Her name was Mrs. Herrera, and she had opinions about everything from my posture to my bedside manner. Also, she had impeccable aim with a plastic cup. Jamie winced. "Oof, a real critic." "She's 92, Lena said, leaning back and exhaling. "I kind of admire her, honestly." Jamie reached into a paper bag beside him and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "I come bearing gifts. Chicken pesto, no tomatoes. I remember things." Lena took the sandwich without comment, peeling back the wrapping. It was still warm. The bread was soft. Real bread, not the chewy cardboard stuff the hospital sold for $6 a pop. "Where'd you get this?" "That little place off 5th, he said. "The grumpy guy with the mustache made it." "You went out of your way to buy me a sandwich made by a man who looks like he yells at pigeons." "I did," Jamie nodded, "because I knew you'd be stuck with cafeteria meatloaf and regret." Lena smiled despite herself. "Thanks." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward. I just settled, comfortable in the way a soft sweater feels after a long day. "So," Jamie said eventually, tapping his fingers on his cup of water, "you ever think about quitting?" Lena raised an eyebrow. "Quitting nursing?" "No, quitting this hospital, the noise, the pressure, the lack of decent snacks." She chewed slowly, then shrugged. "Sometimes, yeah, it's exhausting, but it's something I'm good at, something that makes sense." Jamie nodded, not saying anything right away. "What about you?" she asked, putting her sandwich down. "Do you ever think about quitting whatever it is you do?" He hesitated. His eyes drifted to the far wall where an old poster about CPR training curled at the edges. "All the time," he said finally, "but it's complicated." "It always is," Lena replied, not pushing. A beat of quiet passed. "My dad," Jamie said suddenly, voice lower. "He had this plan, my whole life, where I'd go to school, what I'd major in, who I'd work for. Everything is mapped out like a board game, only the finish line was never mine." Lena blinked, surprised. Jamie rarely talked about his family, or his past, or anything too real. "Did you follow the plan?" she asked. "For a while," he admitted. "But it felt like I was playing a part in someone else's movie. Every smile, every hand I shook, it wasn't me. It was who I was expected to be." Lena watched him carefully. There was a kind of weariness in his expression she hadn't seen before. A rawness. "So I left," he said, "walked out, didn't tell anyone, just disappeared." She wasn't sure what to say. Jamie looked at her, meeting her eyes. "You're the first person who's treated me like a person, not a performance." Lena's heart tripped in her chest. "That's kind of sad, honestly." He laughed, but it sounded tired. "Yeah, I guess it is." They sat there for a while, the hum of the vending machines filling the space between words. Lena looked down at her hands. "My mom got denied coverage once," she said, voice soft. 3 years ago. She'd just been diagnosed with diabetes and needed these injections that cost more than our rent. We applied for emergency assistance, They rejected us on a technicality. Jamie looked over sharply, but said nothing. I spent every penny I had just trying to keep her stable, Lena continued. Took on night shifts, dropped out of school for a year. It was a lot. I'm sorry, Jamie said quietly. She's better now, mostly, Lena said, forcing a smile. But I don't think I've ever stopped being angry. At the system. At the way people fall through cracks no one wants to admit are there. Jamie's jaw tightened. What hospital was it? He asked. Lena paused. Carlisle Medical, downtown. He went still. I know it's not their fault entirely, she added quickly. But it feels like places like that, they look at people like my mom and see numbers, not lives. Jamie didn't speak. Lena tilted her head. You okay? He nodded slowly, but his hands were clenched beneath the table. He started, then stopped. Jamie? He looked at her, eyes haunted. I wish I could change all of that, he said, more than anything. The room felt suddenly too quiet, the kind of quiet where truth tries to climb its way out from underneath too many half-told stories. Lena opened her mouth to ask something, to finally push past the wall he kept throwing up, but her pager buzzed. Room 3, 06, diabetic check. Her mom. She stood, slipping the pager back onto her waistband. I have to go. Jamie nodded, standing too. Of course? She hesitated. Thank you, she said, for the sandwich. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Same time next week, he asked. Maybe sooner. As she walked away, Lena felt something twist deep inside her, like a wire pulled too tight, like a connection fraying just when it was starting to feel real. What she didn't see was Jamie watching her go, a war of emotion etched across his face. Guilt, sadness, longing. And what he didn't say was everything. It started like any other Wednesday. The coffee in the staff lounge was bad, the hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt toast, and Lena was already 2 hours behind on her charting. She was elbow-deep in patient files, scribbling notes with a half-dried-out pen when the hospital's front doors chimed. She barely looked up. Visitors came and went all day. What caught her attention was the sound of a voice. Sharp, purposeful, cutting through the hum of normal hospital noise. Ethan? Ethan Carter? Lena froze. That name, it hit her chest like cold water. She looked up in time to see a woman with perfectly styled hair and a press badge swinging from her lanyard step forward, phone in hand, camera already recording. She was standing in the middle of the waiting area, her gaze fixed on a very familiar figure wearing a slightly wrinkled gray hoodie and jeans. Jamie. Only, apparently, not Jamie. Ethan Carter turned at the sound of his name, his face pale. He said nothing, did nothing. Just stood there as the realization swept across the room like wildfire. A man in a tailored suit near the entrance narrowed his eyes and took a photo. Mr. Carter, he said, tone clipped. Didn't recognize you without the usual entourage. Wait a second, someone muttered behind Lena. Ethan Carter? Like Carlisle Medical Carter? The name fell like a bomb in the room. Lena stepped forward slowly, her body moving before her brain could catch up. She watched as the reporter raised her phone again. Care to comment, Mr. Carter? Is this some kind of social experiment playing poor, or is this a publicity stunt? Jamie, Ethan, held up a hand. Please, don't do this. Not here. The reporter smiled tightly. Oh, I think this is exactly where this belongs. Lena's mouth went dry. Jamie looked around, his eyes scanning until they locked with hers. Lena. She didn't speak. Couldn't. The name Carter rang louder than anything else. Carlisle Medical. The same corporation that had once refused her mother's treatment. This wasn't just deception. This was a betrayal. I can explain, Ethan said quickly, stepping toward her. You're Ethan Carter? She asked, voice low, hollow. As in Carlisle Carter? His silence was answer enough. The reporter looked between them, eyes gleaming. Well, this just got interesting. Do you work here? She asked Lena. How long have you two been acquainted? Lena ignored her, still staring at the man she thought she knew. A few nurses exchanged glances. One of them, Lisa, stepped forward, arms crossed. No wonder you always had time to hang around. I thought it was weird how you knew so much. That watch you wear, I thought it was a knockoff. It wasn't supposed to go like this, Ethan said, his voice cracking. Wasn't supposed to go now? Lena whispered. You pretended to be someone else for weeks. I just wanted, he started. What? She snapped, her voice rising. To see what it felt like to be, what? Normal? Invisible? Poor? The reporter was still filming. People had started to gather, their curiosity ballooning into something uglier. Lena felt like she couldn't breathe. Ethan reached out, his hand hovering near hers. Lena, please. She stepped back. You watched me stress over every tip I made, every shift I picked up so I could buy my mom's meds, and you, what? Went back to your penthouse at night? His face crumpled. I didn't go back to any of that. I've been living in a rental with no heating, walking everywhere, eating instant ramen. You chose that, she said coldly. You had the luxury of choosing struggle. The rest of us, we don't. The reporter was muttering into her mic now, composing her headline on the fly. Hotel Heir exposed slumming in local hospital, romantic ties to nurse. Ethan turned sharply. Stop. This isn't your story. But it was too late. Cameras were already rolling. The story was already being told. Lena turned without another word and walked quickly toward the break room, her pulse roaring in her ears. Behind her, she heard Lisa hiss, You better go, Carter, before someone throws a bedpan. Ethan didn't follow, not at first. But 10 minutes later, she heard the soft knock at the break room door. Lena, he said quietly through the wood. Please. She didn't answer. I never meant to hurt you. She wiped her eyes, angry that she even had tears to begin with. You lied to me every single day. I was trying to find a way to be honest without losing you. Well, she said bitterly, yanking the door open, you found a way to lose me anyway. He flinched. Was it worth it? She asked, voice shaking. Your little experiment in being normal? I didn't know I'd meet you, he said, his voice raw. I wasn't trying to trick you, I just wanted to be seen for who I am, without the Carter name. She stared at him, eyes full of something between heartbreak and fury. Then you should have told me who you were before I told you who I was. He reached for her again, and again she stepped back. Don't, she said. Don't touch me, don't follow me, don't contact me again. And then she walked out of the room, out of the hallway, out of whatever fantasy she'd started to believe in. Behind her, Ethan stood alone in the sterile white light of the break room, surrounded by silence, and every lie he'd ever told. It started like any other Wednesday. The coffee in the staff lounge was bad, the hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt toast, and Lena was already 2 hours behind on her charting. She was elbow-deep in patient files, scribbling notes with a half-dried-out pen when the hospital's front doors chimed. She barely looked up. Visitors came and went all day. What caught her attention was the sound of a voice. Sharp, purposeful, cutting through the hum of normal hospital noise. Ethan? Ethan Carter? Lena froze. That name, it hit her chest like cold water. She looked up in time to see a woman with perfectly styled hair and a press badge swinging from her lanyard step forward, phone in hand, camera already recording. She was standing in the middle of the waiting area, her gaze fixed on a very familiar figure wearing a slightly wrinkled gray hoodie and jeans. Jamie, only, apparently, not Jamie. Ethan Carter turned at the sound of his name, his face pale. He said nothing. Did nothing. Just stood there as the realization swept across the room like wildfire. A man, in a tailored suit near the entrance, narrowed his eyes and took a photo. "Mr. Carter," he said, tone clipped. "Didn't recognize you without the usual entourage." "Wait a second," someone muttered behind Lena. "Ethan Carter? Like Carlisle Medical Carter?" The name fell like a bomb in the room. Lena stepped forward slowly, her body moving before her brain could catch up. She watched as the reporter raised her phone again. "Care to comment, Mr. Carter? Is this some kind of social experiment? Playing poor? Or is this a publicity stunt?" Jamie, Ethan, held up a hand. "Please, don't do this. Not here." The reporter smiled tightly. "Oh, I think this is exactly where this belongs." Lena's mouth went dry. Jamie looked around, his eyes scanning until they locked with hers. "Lena." She didn't speak. Couldn't. The name Carter rang louder than anything else. Carlisle Medical. The same corporation that had once refused her mother's treatment. This wasn't just deception. This was a betrayal. "I can explain," Ethan said quickly, stepping toward her. "You're Ethan Carter?" she asked, voice low, hollow. "As in Carlisle Carter?" His silence was answer enough. The reporter looked between them, eyes gleaming. "Well, this just got interesting. Do you work here?" she asked Lena. "How long have you two been acquainted?" Lena ignored her, still staring at the man she thought she knew. A few nurses exchanged glances. One of them, Lisa, stepped forward, arms crossed. "No wonder you always had time to hang around. I thought it was weird how you knew so much. That watch you wear? I thought it was a knockoff." "It wasn't supposed to go like this," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "Wasn't supposed to go now?" Lena whispered. "You pretended to be someone else for weeks." "I just wanted," he started. "What?" she snapped, her voice rising. "To see what it felt like to be, what? Normal? Invisible? Poor?" The reporter was still filming. People had started to gather, their curiosity ballooning into something uglier. Lena felt like she couldn't breathe. Ethan reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "Lena, please." She stepped back. "You watched me stress over every tip I made, every shift I picked up so I could buy my mom's meds, and you... What? Went back to your penthouse at night?" His face crumpled. "I didn't go back to any of that. I've been living in a rental with no heating, walking everywhere, eating instant ramen. You chose that," she said coldly. "You had the luxury of choosing struggle. The rest of us, we don't." The reporter was muttering into her mic now, composing her headline on the fly. "Hotel Heir exposed slumming in local hospital. Romantic ties to nurse." Ethan turned sharply. "Stop, this isn't your story." But it was too late. Cameras were already rolling. The story was already being told. Lena turned without another word and walked quickly toward the break room, her pulse roaring in her ears. Behind her, she heard Lisa hiss, "You better go, Carter," before someone throws a bedpan. Ethan didn't follow, not at first, but 10 minutes later she heard the soft knock at the break room door. "Lena," he said quietly through the wood. "Please." She didn't answer. "I never meant to hurt you." She wiped her eyes, angry that she even had tears to begin with. "You lied to me every single day." "I was trying to find a way to be honest without losing you." "Well," she said bitterly, yanking the door open, "you found a way to lose me anyway." He flinched. "Was it worth it?" she asked, voice shaking. "Your little experiment in being normal? I didn't know I'd meet you," he said, his voice raw. "I wasn't trying to trick you. I just wanted to be seen for who I am, without the Carter name." She stared at him, eyes full of something between heartbreak and fury. "Then you should have told me who you were before I told you who I was." He reached for her again, and again she stepped back. "Don't," she said. "Don't touch me. Don't follow me. Don't contact me again." And then she walked out of the room, out of the hallway, out of whatever fantasy she'd started to believe in. Behind her, Ethan stood alone in the sterile white light of the break room, surrounded by silence and every lie he'd ever told. Ethan hadn't slept in 3 days. Not real sleep. Not the kind that quieted your mind and made your chest feel anything close to peace. He'd paced the marble floor of his hotel suite more times than he could count, stared out at the city skyline until his eyes went dry, and rehearsed 100 apologies in his head that all sounded weak the second he imagined saying them to her. None of it mattered now. Not the view from the 50th floor, not the glass walls or the champagne still chilling in the suite's fridge. Not the tailored suits in his closet or the legacy his father had been drilling into him since he was old enough to understand what the word inherit meant. It was all noise. All white, useless noise. And somewhere in that noise, he had lost the only real thing he'd stumbled into in years. Lena. He answered the call from his father on the 3rd ring. He already knew what it would be. "Ethan," Richard Carter's voice came through with a sharpness that could slice granite. "I assume you've seen the news." "I've seen it," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't plan for it to go public." "You didn't plan at all," Richard snapped. "You walked away from a board seat, vanished for weeks, and now you've reduced the Carter name to viral gossip about some nurse and a mid-level hospital. Do you have any idea how this affects our investors?" "I wasn't thinking about our investors," Ethan replied, his tone flat. "I was thinking about my life." There was a pause on the other end, the dangerous kind. "Your life," Richard repeated slowly. "Your life exists because of this company, because of my work, and this rebellion, this fantasy of yours, it ends now. I want you back in this office by tomorrow morning." "No," Ethan said simply. "No?" Richard barked. "Ethan, I'm not asking. I'm not coming back." "You are," his father said, voice growing colder. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure every cent you've ever touched from this company is clawed back. Do you think walking away is noble? Try doing it without the safety net." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You'd take me to court?" "I'd remind you who made you," Richard said. "And who can unmake you?" The line went dead. Ethan stood there for a long time, the phone still in his hand, the taste of regret bitter on his tongue. He walked to the mirror and stared at himself. He didn't look like the heir to a billion-dollar healthcare empire. He looked like a man who'd tried to run from the world he was born into and failed. Later that evening, he pulled on a worn hoodie and left through the back service elevator to avoid the lobby. No limo, no driver. Just him, walking through the city with his hands in his pockets and his heart heavier than he could carry. He didn't go to Lena's apartment. He wanted to. Every step he took fought the urge to turn around and climb those narrow stairs, to knock, to beg, to explain. But he had no explanation that would undo what he'd already broken. She had trusted him, and he had let her fall. Instead, he walked aimlessly until he found himself at the edge of the river. The water moved slowly, almost reluctantly, under the moonlight. He sat on a bench near the railing, pulled his phone from his pocket, and opened their last text thread. "Lena, you never said your last name." "Ethan, guess I'm a man of mystery." "Lena, That's not always a good thing. Ethan, maybe someday I'll tell you everything. Lena, I hope I don't have to wait that long. Ethan, you won't. He stared at that last message until the screen dimmed. Then, finally, he powered the phone off. Back in her apartment, Lena sat curled on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Her mother sat nearby, quietly crocheting, the steady rhythm of the needle offering a strange kind of comfort. "Do you want to talk about it?" her mom asked gently. Lena shook her head. Her mom paused, setting the yarn aside. "I like him, that boy." Lena swallowed hard. "He's not who I thought he was." "No one ever is," her mom said, not unkindly. "But that doesn't mean they're not worth knowing." Lena didn't reply. She felt stupid for letting him in, stupid for believing he was just a sweet, slightly awkward guy who liked bad coffee and worse jokes, stupid for not questioning more. But mostly she felt hollow. Because what they'd had, what she thought they had, wasn't entirely fake. She knew that. The way he looked at her, the way he remembered little things she said, the way he made space for her in a world that never seemed to have enough room. Those things were real. But now, so was the lie. She closed her eyes and let the tears come quietly, without ceremony. She didn't see the headlines anymore, didn't check her phone, didn't respond to the text from Jenny or the other nurses who kept asking, "Are you okay?" And "Did you really not know who he was?" She stayed offline, went to work, came home, slept when she could, pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. At the hospital, his absence was immediate and jarring. No more sticky notes on her locker. No more bad puns about thermometers. No more bags of pretzels mysteriously appearing next to her coffee. The hallway, where he used to lean against the wall, grinning like he had all the time in the world, now felt colder somehow. She told herself she was better off. And still, when she passed the vending machine, she always looked for Peanut M and Ms., even though she never bought them. She wasn't sure if she missed the candy, or the man who used to share it. The Carter estate sat on a hill like it had been carved out of the sky, massive, symmetrical, and cold. Every window was polished. Every hedge was trimmed. Every brick whispered control. Ethan stood on the front steps, suitcase in one hand, backpack slung over the other shoulder, wearing the same hoodie he'd left the city in 3 nights ago. It didn't belong here. Neither did he. The butler opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Ethan," he said politely, though his eyes hesitated, lingering on the worn sneakers and wrinkled jeans. "Hey, Martin," Ethan said, brushing past without waiting for an invitation. Inside, nothing had changed. Same marble floors, same oil paintings of dead relatives, the same scent of lemon polish and silence. It felt like stepping into a museum, one where you were both an exhibit and a prisoner. Richard Carter was waiting in the study. The fireplace was lit, though the evening was barely cool, and a glass of scotch rested on the table beside him, untouched. "I was wondering how long it would take you to crawl back," his father said without looking up. "I'm not crawling," Ethan replied evenly, setting his suitcase down but not sitting. "No." Richard took a sip of the scotch now, his expression unreadable. "Then what's this? A family reunion? An apology?" "I came to tell you I'm done," Ethan said. "For good." Richard leaned back as if amused. "Done with what exactly?" "The company, the board, the inheritance, all of it." Silence filled the room like fog. "You don't get to be done," Richard said finally. "You are the future of Carlisle. The name doesn't move forward without you." Ethan met his father's gaze. "Then maybe the name doesn't need to move forward." Richard stood, slow and deliberate. "You're being emotional, embarrassed. Because your little experiment backfired and the girl didn't love you after all. I warned you. I told you people don't want the real you. They want what you represent." "She wanted the truth," Ethan said. "And I couldn't give it to her. That's on me. But this place, this empire of image, it's not what I want. It never was." His father scoffed. "And what do you want? To fold towels at a roadside motel? Live paycheck to paycheck until you realize none of them ever respected you?" "I want to be someone I can respect," Ethan said quietly. Richard slammed the glass down. "You're a Carter. That name means something." Ethan shook his head. "It means debt, control, a brand, not a person." "You're walking away from everything," Richard said, voice rising. "Do you understand that? You forfeit your seat, your assets, your trust." "I know," Ethan said. "I've already signed the papers." His father blinked, caught off guard. "You what?" "I spoke with legal yesterday. I'm surrendering everything tied to the Carter family trust. I've transferred the shares back, my apartment, my accounts, it's all being liquidated." "You're throwing your life away," Richard said, not with anger now, but something colder, contempt. "No," Ethan said, "I'm finally starting it." He turned and walked out without waiting for permission, without taking one last look at the hallway portraits, the chandelier imported from Prague, or the silent staff standing just out of view. That life was never his. He didn't want gold-plated ceilings. He wanted air. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood behind a worn pine counter at the Pinewood Lodge, a rustic mountain inn nestled against the edge of a hiking trail 6 hours from the city. He wore a flannel shirt with the lodge logo stitched over the chest, khakis with a fraying back pocket, and a name tag that read just Ethan. Not Ethan Carter, not heir apparent, just Ethan. Cabin 6 keys sticking again, called Marcus, the lodge's 65-year-old owner, from behind a toolbox. "You feel like channeling your inner handyman?" "I'll give it a shot," Ethan said, grabbing the key and a bottle of WD-40. The job paid next to nothing. The room he stayed in was barely big enough for the twin bed and the chipped dresser beside it. The shower made a sound like a dying animal every time he turned it on. And yet, he slept better here than he ever had in the city. He learned how to patch leaky sinks, fix pilot lights, and fold fitted sheets without screaming. He stocked firewood. He checked in families with too many kids and couples with too much luggage. Nobody asked about his past. Nobody cared about his last name. And every night, when the lodge quieted down, he sat on the back porch with a cup of cheap instant coffee and watched the stars as they belonged to him. Sometimes he thought about Lena. He wondered if she was still mad, if she'd found someone honest, if she still walked the hospital hallways with that same stubborn glint in her eye. He hadn't reached out, not since the day she walked away from him without looking back. He didn't know what he'd say if he did. He only knew that the ache in his chest hadn't gone anywhere. One evening, after wrestling a malfunctioning space heater into working condition, Ethan pulled out his wallet and unfolded a small photo tucked behind his ID. It was a candid shot he'd taken with his phone the afternoon they'd eaten sandwiches on the hospital roof. Lena had been mid-laugh, hair wind-blown, face flushed with sunlight. She hadn't known he'd taken it. He didn't look at it every day, just the days when he missed her more than usual. That night, a storm rolled over the mountains, thunder rumbling like distant grief. Ethan sat on the back steps of the lodge, watching the rain blur the trees into shadows. He thought about all the things he'd lost: money, reputation, legacy, and the only thing that still made him ache, the one he couldn't replace, was Lena. Because she had seen him, really saw him, before she knew who he was, before he remembered who he wanted to be. And now, all he could do was hope that one day, maybe, she'd believe that the man he was becoming had been inside him all along. Lena sat in the library, surrounded by the soft shuffle of pages and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Her laptop was open in front of her, cursor blinking against an untouched paragraph of her term paper. She'd reread the same sentence 5 times, and still couldn't tell you what it said. It had been 3 weeks since the day the world shifted under her feet, since the moment Jamie turned into Ethan Carter, and everything she thought was real suddenly wasn't. 3 weeks of working, studying, ignoring. 3 weeks of pretending. She picked up her pencil and started sketching on the margin of her notebook, absent-minded lines turning into a messy cityscape, rough and uneven, like something that had once been beautiful before someone came and cracked it down the middle. Jen, a classmate from her nursing program, leaned over and peeked at the page. "That doesn't look like Florence," she said, nodding toward the book they were supposed to be reading. Lena smiled faintly. "It's not. Just clearing my head." "Have you seen this?" Jen asked, sliding her phone across the table. Lena glanced down. The screen showed a business news headline. "Carter, Heir, resigns from family business. Shocking board and investors." Beneath it was a photo of Ethan in a suit, standing in front of a podium, flanked by men in power ties and frowning executives. She blinked. The image didn't match the one in her mind. The guy in a gray hoodie who snuck her M&Ms and told bad jokes about thermometers. "He quit," Jen said. "Like, walked away from the whole thing. Stock's already taken a hit. Apparently, his dad's freaking out." Lena pushed the phone back gently. "I don't want to talk about him." But that wasn't entirely true. Later that night, after her shift at the cafe, after her mom had gone to bed and the apartment had gone still, Lena opened her laptop again and searched for his name. There weren't many details. The statements from the Carlyle group were short and sterile. Pursuing other opportunities, transition of leadership, and family matters. Nothing that hinted at the why. Nothing that explains why someone would give up everything people usually chase for a life with no guarantees. Unless it had never been about the money in the first place. Her mother stirred the next morning's oatmeal on the stove while Lena sat at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee. Maria Brooks had gotten stronger over the past month, walking better, smiling more, and even starting to cook again. But she hadn't stopped noticing things. She glanced over at her daughter, one eyebrow raised. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired," Lena murmured. "Is it the boy?" Lena nearly dropped her spoon. "Mom, please." Maria kept stirring, unbothered. "You know, your father wasn't always the man you remember. He used to be softer, kinder. Money changed him. But it didn't start that way." "This isn't about Dad," Lena said, though the parallel wasn't lost on her. Her mom looked at her carefully. "Did Ethan lie?" Lena hesitated. "Yes." "Did he care about you?" Lena's throat tightened. "I think he did." Maria nodded slowly. "Then maybe what you saw in him was real, even if the rest wasn't." Lena didn't respond. She didn't know how. Later that night, she stared at the bus ticket confirmation on her phone. She hadn't meant to click book now. She'd just meant to look, to see if it was even possible. But the Pinewood Lodge wasn't that far. A 6-hour bus ride. 2 changes. 1 layover. It would cost her almost everything she'd saved for textbooks next semester. And still, her hand didn't shake when she hit purchase. The next morning, with her overnight bag slung over one shoulder and a note taped to the fridge for her mom, Lena boarded the 6:10 a.m. bus heading north. She told herself she wasn't chasing anything. Not love, not closure. She was just going to ask a question that had been echoing in her chest since the day Ethan disappeared. Was any of it real? The ride was long and quiet. Mountains replaced city skylines. Trees blurred into forests. The bus driver made jokes no one laughed at. Lena stared out the window and tried not to imagine how it would feel to see him again. What she would say, what he would say. The lodge was exactly as the website had described. Rustic, charming, a little rundown in a way that felt intentional. The sign out front creaked in the wind. The front porch sagged. The pine trees rustled overhead like they were whispering secrets. Lena stood on the gravel driveway for a moment, unsure if she should knock or just turn around and walk away. Then the door opened. An older man with a gray beard and kind eyes looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "You checking in?" She hesitated. "I'm looking for someone. Ethan. Just Ethan. He works here." The man's expression shifted. "You a friend?" "Oh, I don't know," she admitted. "I used to be." Before he could answer, a door behind the counter opened and Ethan stepped out, a stack of towels in his arms. He froze. The towels slipped from his hands. Lena took a slow breath. "Hi." He looked stunned. "You found me." "I had help," she said. "A friend told me." He nodded, still looking like he couldn't believe she was standing in front of him. "Do you want to come outside? The back deck has a view." "I didn't come for the view," she said, but she followed him anyway. The sun hung low over the treetops as they stepped onto the wooden deck. The forest stretched out beneath them, endless and golden. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they hadn't said pressing in from all sides. "You came a long way," Ethan said finally. "I needed to see," she replied. "For myself." "See what?" "That any of it was real." He looked at her then, not as Jamie, not as Ethan Carter, but as the man who had once handed her a warm sandwich in a cold cafeteria and listened like her words actually mattered. "It was all real," he said quietly, "except the part where I lied." Lena looked down at her hands. "Then, why did you lie?" "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does," he said. "Like a bank account, a last name, a legacy I never asked for." She nodded. "You should have trusted me." "I know." The wind rustled the trees below. "I'm still mad," she said. "I don't blame you. But I'm also here," she added. He smiled, small, sad, hopeful. "That's more than I deserve." They didn't touch, didn't promise, didn't pretend that everything was fine. But they stood there together, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them didn't hurt. They sat on the back porch of the Pinewood Lodge with 2 chipped mugs of gas station coffee and a blanket neither of them was using. The late afternoon sun draped itself lazily over the trees, painting the sky in soft gold. The air smelled like pine needles and fresh earth. For a while, they said nothing, just listened to the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of wood beneath their feet. Lena held her mug carefully, warming her hands even though the coffee had gone cold. Ethan finally broke the silence. "I should have told you everything the night we had dinner in the cafeteria." She didn't answer, so he went on. "I'd been planning to. I even wrote it down on one of those dumb sticky notes. But when I saw you, tired and vulnerable and still smiling like the world hadn't eaten you alive, I couldn't do it. Because I knew if I said it out loud, it would change the way you looked at me." She didn't look at him now, and you were right. He nodded. "Yeah, but I wanted to be someone else with you, just for a little while. Someone who had nothing to offer except bad jokes and pretzels." Lena's voice was quiet but sharp. "You had a lot more than that, Ethan. You had my trust." He winced. "I know. I keep replaying that moment. When the reporter said my name. The way your face changed, I'll never forget it." She looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't polished anymore. His hair was longer, his stubble uneven. There was a tear in the sleeve of his flannel shirt and faint calluses on his hands. But his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. They still held too much emotion for someone who pretended not to feel anything. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Living," he said. "For the first time in my life." She raised an eyebrow. "I wake up, I fix stuff," he explained. "Sometimes I chop wood. Sometimes I change sheets. I know the names of all the regulars. I have a room with one chair and a sink that leaks a little, and it's the most honest place I've ever lived in." She stared at her mug. "And your father? He thinks I've lost my mind. Maybe you have." He chuckled. "Feels like the sanest I've ever been." She said nothing, so he continued. "I've spent so much of my life being who I was supposed to be, networking, strategizing, saying the right things in rooms full of people I didn't trust. But with you, I didn't have to perform. You didn't care about any of that." "I didn't know any of that," she said pointedly. "But you wouldn't have cared," he said softly. "That's what scared me the most." Lena's throat tightened. He leaned back against the porch post, watching the wind dance through the trees. "Do you remember that night on the loading dock? You had just come off a brutal shift, and I handed you a protein bar like it was some kind of prize." She smirked. "It was half crushed. True, but you still took it. You sat beside me like we were equals, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a fraud. I just felt seen." Lena didn't know what to say to that. "I know I hurt you," he said, "and I don't expect anything. But I need you to know that I'm not here hiding. I'm here because I needed to strip everything away, to see who I really was underneath the name, the money, the lies. And if you still hate me after all that, I'll walk away and never ask again." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't hate you." He blinked. "You don't?" "I was furious, humiliated. I wanted to throw my pager at you and scream. But hate? Number. I couldn't hate someone who sat with me when my mom got bad news, who brought me ginger tea without asking, who remembered my favorite hot sauce." A slow, cautious smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You still carry it in your bag?" "Always," she said. They sat in that half-light, somewhere between forgiveness and something like hope. A single bird landed on the porch railing and then flew off again as if it had just come to check in. "I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "Us. If there even is an us." "There doesn't have to be," Ethan said. "You owe me nothing. I just needed to see you one more time, to tell you the truth with no masks, no versions, just me." She stared out at the trees. "Do you still write terrible sticky notes?" "I've upgraded to recycled napkins," he said. She smiled, despite herself. He stood slowly. "I'll walk you to the bus stop, if that's okay." She hesitated, then stood beside him. "It's okay." They walked in silence down the gravel path, the fading light brushing the tops of their shoulders. When they reached the clearing, the road stretched out before them, empty for now. He turned to her, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "You know where to find me." She nodded. "I do." They didn't hug, didn't kiss, didn't make promises they weren't ready to keep. But as she stepped onto the bus an hour later, she looked out the window and saw him still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching the road like it might carry her back someday. She didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. 3 weeks after their last conversation, Lena's phone buzzed with a headline she never expected to read. Hotel Heir to speak out on class divide in hospitality industry. Her thumb hovered over the article, heart pounding. The small photo attached showed Ethan standing behind a podium in a modest gray blazer, not the tailored suits of his past. The backdrop wasn't a grand ballroom or some luxury venue. It was a modest community hall with water stains on the ceiling tiles and a banner behind him that read, "Fair Work, Real Voices." Lena stared at the screen, rereading the headline like it might change if she blinked hard enough. The event was streaming live. She clicked. The camera panned slowly as Ethan stepped up to the mic. He looked different. Not just physically. He'd trimmed his beard. His clothes were simple. But something in his posture had shifted. There was no trace of the carefully curated confidence he once wore like armor. Instead, he looked like a man who had peeled back all the layers and dared to speak without them. "My name," he began, "is Ethan Carter. And until a few months ago, I thought I understood this industry because I grew up above it. Literally. My family owns a chain of hotels across 5 continents. My first Christmas was spent in a presidential suite. My first job title was made up by a PR manager to make me look relatable. But the truth is, I didn't understand a thing. Not until I worked beside the people whose names never appear in glossy brochures." The audience, mostly service workers, union reps, and students, sat silent. "I took a bus," he continued. "I lived in a room where the heater creaked all night and the water took 10 minutes to get warm. I scrubbed toilets, fixed broken faucets, and served people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. And through that, I learned more than I ever did in a boardroom. I learned that dignity isn't tied to wealth, that intelligence doesn't require a private education, and that kindness, the real kind, costs nothing." Lena leaned forward. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. "I also learned something else," Ethan said, "that I'd spent most of my life hiding behind my last name, and in doing so I hurt people who deserved better, especially one woman who showed me grace when I didn't deserve it, who lent me bus fare without knowing anything about me, who welcomed me into her life with no expectation, and whom I lied to because I didn't believe I could be enough without my name." He looked directly at the camera, and Lena felt the burn of his gaze through the screen. "I'm not here to win anyone back. I'm here to say that I was wrong. And if you're watching this, Lena, thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't even see in myself." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Ethan adjusted the mic, but his voice stayed steady. "I've turned down my inheritance. I've resigned from the Carter Hotels Board, and I've started a new initiative. It's called Open Ledger, a platform for hospitality workers to anonymously report wage theft, discrimination, and mistreatment without fear of retaliation. We're funding legal resources, partnering with state colleges for hospitality scholarships, and creating a job board that highlights small, ethical hotels." A woman in the front row stood up and clapped. Then another, then half the room. Ethan raised a hand. "This isn't a redemption arc, it's accountability, and it's long overdue." Lena didn't realize she'd been crying until her vision blurred and the screen went fuzzy. Later that night, her mother noticed. "He meant it," Maria said quietly, placing a hand on her daughter's back as they stood in the kitchen. "He's trying to make it right." Lena nodded slowly. "I know, I don't know what that means for me yet." "Maybe it doesn't have to mean anything right away," Maria offered. "Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let time show you." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She replayed Ethan's speech again, catching the tremble in his voice when he said her name, the way he looked not just at the camera but through it. He hadn't asked for forgiveness. He hadn't begged for a second chance. He had simply told the truth. Publicly, openly, vulnerably. And that mattered. The next morning, her phone lit up with a message from James Whitaker. He didn't tell anyone he was doing that speech. He just sent out a press release an hour before. We didn't even know about Open Ledger until it launched with its first 3 cases already logged. He's not playing anymore, Lena. He's building something real. Lena replied with just one word. I saw. At the museum, she walked past the exhibit she had helped curate. A painting of an unnamed Renaissance woman stared back at her. Strong jaw, direct gaze. A portrait forgotten by time but now displayed with the reverence it always deserved. She smiled faintly as if the woman understood. That evening, Lena sat at her desk and pulled out a blank note card. She stared at it for a long time before writing, I don't know what this is yet, but I see you too now. She didn't sign it. She just mailed it to Pinewood Lodge. And for the first time in months, her hand didn't shake when she let go. Ethan was sanding the edge of an old porch swing when the front desk radio crackled. There's a guest asking for you. He blinked, wiped his hands on his jeans and responded, Name? The voice came back. She didn't give one, just said you'd know. A strange feeling settled into his chest, an odd mix of hope, panic, and disbelief. He walked across the gravel path toward the main building. The air was crisp, pine-heavy. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. And there, standing by the fireplace, was Lena. Her coat was too thin for the mountain chill. Her bag hung loosely off one shoulder. And for a long, charged moment, neither of them said anything. You found the place, Ethan said, his voice rough with surprise and something else, uncertainty. Lena gave a half shrug. You gave a very public address. Wasn't hard. He gestured awkwardly. Do you want to sit, or I can make coffee? You always lead with coffee, she said with a flicker of a smile. Still your safety net? He laughed, then caught himself. Yeah, some habits die hard. They moved to the back patio, where 2 rocking chairs faced the tree line. The sun dipped lower, casting golden streaks through the branches. Ethan poured her a cup, then sat beside her, holding his own with both hands like a shield. I didn't expect to see you again, he admitted after a moment. I didn't expect to want to, Lena replied, eyes steady. But then I watched you speak. Not as the Carter heir, not as some guy trying to prove a point, but just you. And that changed things. He nodded slowly, waiting. I'm not here for an apology, she added. You've already done that, publicly, privately, and pretty thoroughly. Then what are you here for? Ethan asked quietly. I guess, to see if this is still a story worth continuing, she said. Not going back. Not pretending like none of it happened. But maybe starting again, from page 1. He swallowed hard, then set down his cup. You should know. I'm still figuring myself out. This life, it's not glamorous. The bed creaks, the roof leaks, and I get blisters from fixing busted plumbing. I didn't come for chandeliers, Lena replied. I came because the person you've become feels real, and because despite everything I missed talking to you. He looked at her then, really looked. The tension in her shoulders, the worry tucked in the corners of her mouth. I missed you too, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence for a moment. The swing of wind through the trees filled the space between them. I brought something, Lena said, reaching into her coat pocket. She handed him a small note card. He read it. Just one sentence written in her precise hand. I don't know what this is yet, but I see you too now. His throat tightened. He looked up and found her watching him with something close to fear, but also hope. I don't deserve this, he said softly. Maybe not, she answered. But I don't need perfect. I need honesty." He nodded, setting the card down gently beside his cup. "So," she said, shifting in her seat, "tell me about the lodge, about what you're building here." Ethan smiled then, something warm and earnest. "It's small, but we're trying to make it something more. The guests are mostly hikers and families. No room service, no valet, just a fire that crackles, and a moose head on the wall that kids stare at for hours." Lena laughed, and it lit something in the fading light. "And you?" he asked. "Still curating forgotten artists?" "Actually," she said, leaning back, "my next show is about power and perception, how we frame stories based on who we think someone is. I think you'd like it." "I already do," Ethan said, his smile soft. As the sky darkened into indigo and the first stars blinked into existence, they kept talking. About small things, about real things, about everything in between. Later, when he walked her to the guest cabin, she paused at the door. "I don't know where this goes," she said, facing him. "But if we keep walking it, I need it to be different this time. No secrets, no masks. Only truth," Ethan promised. She stepped forward then, closing the space between them. Not a grand romantic kiss, not some sweeping movie ending, just her hand slipping into his, and his fingers tightening gently around hers. And in that quiet moment under the canopy of stars, it felt like enough. Not an ending, but a beginning. 18 months later, Lena adjusted the name tag on her blazer and stared up at the banner hanging across the glass atrium. Bridging Worlds, Art, Identity, and Redemption. It was her first solo-curated exhibition at the Weston Contemporary Museum. A project born not only of academic passion but of lived experience. The collection featured unknown works from marginalized artists, people who, for one reason or another, had been overlooked. The room buzzed with donors, students, and local press. But for Lena, the most important guest hadn't arrived yet. She stood beside a centerpiece installation, an enormous mixed-media canvas titled Unmasked, when she heard footsteps behind her. "You always did like dramatic titles," Ethan said softly. She turned and saw him, clean-cut in a charcoal suit that looked just sharp enough to respect the occasion, but relaxed enough to still feel like him. His eyes were the same, grounded, honest, steady. "You made it," Lena said, her voice barely hiding the emotion behind the words. "I wouldn't have missed it." He smiled and stepped closer, holding out a small box wrapped in brown paper. "For you." She opened it carefully. Inside was an old brass key attached to a simple tag that read, "Room 4, Pinewood Lodge, yours whenever you need it." She laughed, her eyes wet. "You're not subtle." "I try not to be anymore," he said. Lena tucked the key into her pocket and straightened. "Want the tour?" "I want the full Lena Gardner experience," Ethan replied. "Rants, side tangents, and all." She led him through the gallery, stopping at pieces that carried personal resonance. One painting, Between Worlds, featured a cracked golden bridge stretched between two cliffs, and she hesitated longer than usual. "This one reminds me of us," she said, "the space between who we were and who we're trying to become." He reached out, his hand brushing hers gently. "I think we're closer to the middle now." Later, they stood by the refreshment table, sipping wine out of compostable cups. Lena's colleagues kept eyeing Ethan curiously, murmuring quietly, clearly trying to place him. The name Carter had faded from headlines, but the myth still lingered. "So," Lena said, looking at him over the rim of her glass, "how's the lodge?" He grinned. "Still standing. We expanded the garden beds. I got really into composting. Who knew rot could be so satisfying?" She snorted. You're dangerously close to becoming a farmer. I'll take that over Heir to an Empire any day. And your consulting firm? Still running. We've helped 12 small hotels double their bookings, all local-owned, no chain affiliations. Lena's expression turned proud. You know, I think you figured it out. What's that? How to take what you were born into and turn it into something that doesn't define you, but empowers others. Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. It was never about rejecting everything, just reclaiming it on my own terms. A quiet moment passed. Then, as the event wrapped and guests filtered out, Lena took Ethan's hand and led him out a side door into the cool evening. They walked in silence for a few blocks until they reached a bench under a willow tree in the small sculpture garden behind the museum. I used to sit here after class, she said, brushing a leaf off the bench. Try to imagine a future where I wasn't constantly afraid of falling short. He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. Do you still feel that way? Not as much, I think. Having someone believe in me helped. Even when I didn't trust them entirely, even when I was mad, you never stopped showing up. Ethan didn't respond at first. Then he said quietly, I thought I'd lost you for good, Lena. I was prepared to. But then you found your way back, and I realized. Maybe the real test of love isn't how perfect it starts, but how honest it becomes when everything breaks. She smiled slowly. That sounds like something you'd paint on wood and hang in cabin 3. He laughed. Too late. Already did. The laughter faded into a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the key again. She turned it over in her fingers before slipping it back. I don't know what our future looks like, she said honestly. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. But I do know I want to keep choosing you, one day at a time. Ethan turned to face her. Then I'll keep showing up, day by day. They sat like that, no labels, no declarations, just two people who had fallen apart, found themselves and chosen to try again. Back at the museum, Lena's phone buzzed with congratulatory texts, gallery invites, and even a query from a New York curator. She didn't check any of them, not yet. Instead, she rested her head against Ethan's shoulder and whispered, Hey. Yeah? Thanks for needing bus fare. He chuckled, arm slipping around her. Best $3 I ever didn't have. And just like that, a simple $20 bill turned into the beginning of something no one could have predicted. Not a transaction, but a transformation. What started with a kind gesture in a hospital waiting room became a story of truth, identity, second chances, and learning to see past what money can buy. Sophie's life changed the moment she chose kindness without expectation. And Ethan? He finally stepped out of his father's shadow and into the light of who he was meant to be. Not the heir to an empire, but a man willing to rebuild everything from the ground up for something real. Because sometimes the smallest choices reveal the biggest hearts. If this story moved you, if you've ever believed in second chances, quiet heroes, or the kind of love that defies status, drop a like, share this video with someone who still believes in genuine connection, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that it only takes one moment to change a life forever. What would you do if you were Sophie that day? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, the most extraordinary people often enter our lives when we're just doing something ordinary. Stay kind, stay curious. See you in the next story.